In this tutorial, I'm going to introduce you to the Arnold renderer. In Maya 2017, the Arnold renderer is now the standard renderer that comes with Maya. It actually defaults to the Arnold renderer instead of software. Mental Ray is a plugin that you can add, but I really like Arnold as I'm learning more about it, and so that's what I'll be using, and I'll show you some reasons why Arnold is a really cool renderer. So I want to begin. I'm just going to create a little scene here. I'll choose a plane, and I'm going to hit R and scale up the center of that plane just so I have a flat surface. And then I'll build a sphere here, and I'll probably make the sphere a little bigger. And I want to see what this will look like rendered. So when we render our scene, we're calculating all of the math data that's going on, all of the lighting and reflections and shadows and everything like that. That you don't get when you're looking at your real-time view. You can press 7 on your keyboard and see what it looks like with lighting. It's not accurate. I don't like to use this really. I'm going to go back to 5 to go back to my regular view. Instead, what I can use is up here at the top, you'll see that one of your menu options is called Arnold, and if I click on that, I can go to Render. And this will give you a real-time view of a rendered version of your final project, even if I move things. Right now it's completely black because we don't have any light in our scene. And so we need to add a light. Later I'll talk about the sky dome and the physical sky. Right now I'm just going to choose one of the standard lights that Maya has. So if I come over here onto the left side of my menu, I have an option called Create, and I'm choosing Light, and I'm going to start with just a simple point light, which is an omnidirectional light. It goes in all directions. It's kind of like a light bulb. And when I click on that, that light is now available, and I can move it wherever I want. But if you go back to your renderer, you'll notice if I go back to render, it's not very powerful, but you can see if I move this around that it's actually updating in real time in that renderer. So this render view that Arnold comes with is amazing, and it allows you to see what your rendered project will look like as you're moving things. Even if I rotate around, you can see that that render view updates automatically. But this light, the lights that Maya have, they're set up for the software mode still, and so they're not, we have to turn up the intensity of them. If I press Control A a couple of times until I get to the attributes of this light, so with this light selected, now I'm at the attributes for that light, and you'll notice that the intensity is at 1. And I've found that for lighting to work in Arnold, it's got to be up in the 500 or above range. I'll just type in 500 here to increase the intensity to that point. And you'll see that now I'm getting some actual light. I may want to turn that down in this case, but that regular 1 to 10 intensity is not going to cut it. And we have a light. I could add another surface here, another primitive. And you'll see that with the renderer, when we're rendering objects, we get shadows. Objects will cast shadows. They will just look really cool. You'll notice a little bit of these dots. That's noise that we can fix by rendering at a higher quality, but it slows things down. You won't be able to see it at this speed in the render view. So for now, at least, that will be fine. The other issue is that you'll notice that every object comes into Maya when it's first created as kind of a dull gray. That's called a Lambert. That's a material that's placed onto your geometry, and it always defaults to that. So let's go ahead and change that now. Up at the top, we have an option here. It's called the Display Hypershader window. It's this blue circle, and if I click on that, it's going to open my hypershader. And the hypershader is where we can create new materials. We can make things that'll go onto here that are different than the standard one. So up here at the top is your browser, and this is kind of like your I like to think of it as the materials you've purchased. So you have right now in this first scene a couple ones that are defaulted. This Lambert one is the material that every object that comes in the first time when you create them, every primitive, will have on it. And if I want to create new ones, I have this Create tab, and I think of this as the store where I can go and get more materials to use. Some common ones that are used, the Lambert, which is a matte finish. It's dull. It doesn't shine at all. You have Fongs and blends. I believe Fongs are faster to render than blends. They're pretty similar. The way that the highlight that makes them shiny works is different. I can show you that as an example. I'll click on this Fong down here, and now the Fong is in my browser. And also I can see the properties. So these are all changes that I can make to this now to make it into the material that I'm looking for. The first one is color. I can click on this and change the color. So let's say I want a red. So I can drag these sliders over until it's red, and you can see in the material viewer it's showing you an idea of what it's going to look like. I can turn up transparency. I can make it incandescent, which makes it light up, even though that light does not exist in it. It doesn't cast light when you render it. Specular color. So your specular highlight is this thing that makes it look shiny. It's that reflection of the light, and so you can turn up or down that sort of thing here. And there's a lot of different things that you can change on these materials. Now, if I want to apply it here, there's a bunch of ways to do that too. The one that I think is the easiest is I can just hold down, I can press down on the mouse wheel button and pick it up and drag it onto the object. I can also have this object selected and right click on it here and say assign material to selection, and that'll make all the selected objects have that material. I can right click on the primitive here and I can say assign existing material. While I'm looking at that, this is a good time to mention that it's always a good idea to name your materials, because they always come in as Fong 1, Fong 2, Blend 1, Lambert 2, and it's good to name these. So I'm going to go ahead and name this rubber ball. You'll notice that now it's called that in my browser too. It'll just make it easier when you have a bunch of different materials to keep track of them. So I'll go ahead and close that now, and we'll see what that looks like in my render view. So I see that I've turned up the reflectivity, so you can see that it's actually reflecting the gray of the plane on the surface there a little bit. You can see a little bit of a reflection of the cone there, and those are all things that can only happen in render. That's the math that it's calculating in there. You can see that it's got this specular highlight, which is this part here where it's glowing, and I can adjust that to make it look more or less shiny. But there are a lot of different materials. So I'll show you the anisotropic next. I'll open up my hypershade again, click on this blue circle, and the anisotropic is designed to look like a metal that has grooves in it. So I'm just going to middle mouse drag that out to here. Maybe change that to like a light blue or something. And so the anisotropic has an interesting, the specular highlight is different. It's got more of a metallic look to it. And in this case, you can see even the polygons of the cone. I'll probably have to turn up the subdivisions on that. But there's a lot of things I can change with that too. I've noticed that transparency, I haven't been able to get that to work in the Arnold view yet, and so I'm still looking into that. I can change the color, I can change the spread of that, so I can tighten it up so it looks like it's a lot shinier, like that. So there's a lot of options for these sort of things. The most common ones I think are Lambert, Blinn, Fong, and this anisotropic. Now in addition to that, bring in another sphere here. We're making a real 90s style screensaver. This would come with Windows. And I'm going to create another one. And Arnold comes with its own set of materials as well. If I click on the name Arnold down here and create, you'll see all of them. My favorite one, the one I think it's got the most use, is AI Standard Surface. You can also, up here in this little text box, you can type in the name of something. So if I type in AI Sta, I'll find that there's the standard Arnold render materials. And that's a fast way of finding things as well. So if I can click on this standard surface is really cool. It has a bunch of different options. You have everything from like the color and the specular like you did before. You have subsurface, so you can make it like kind of things underneath the surface of it, like skin or a leaf. There's all sorts of different things that you can slide and get different properties for your material. But what I really like about the standard surface is under presets, if I click on this presets, there are a tremendous amount of pre-made materials that you can use. For example, Chrome. So if I click on Chrome and I say replace, I'm going to middle drag that onto there. Now that second sphere I created has a chrome, which is an extremely reflective material there. You can see that. If I do another one, now I can apply the same material to multiple objects, but if I want it to have different properties, I have to create another material. I have to bring another material into my browser. So I'm going to go AI standard surface. Again, in this one, I'm going to call it gold because I'm going to use the gold preset here. I'll replace it with the gold, and then I'll have to drag it onto, use the middle mouse, the mouse wheel, drag it onto there. And now this one's got a gold material. Now it's really dark. I can change that by adding more lights to a scene. So I can go here to lights, maybe do an ambient light. That can just give you kind of an overall lighting situation. Once again, I'm going to have to turn the intensity of that up. Let's try 100. Nope. All right, well, let's just do another point light then. Forget the ambient light. You can see that changing as I slide this around. And so you can make some really cool materials very quickly with the standard surface shader. One more thing that I want to do, I want to show you just as an example. We'll get into this in depth more later, but I can even place an image or a video onto an object. So it doesn't have to just be a color or a material like this. I can even place images that I've drawn or found onto these things. They don't go onto spheres great, but I'll just show you as an example. I found this picture of Nicolas Cage just being himself on the internet, and I saved it as a JPEG. And so now I'm going to create another material. And I'll do a Lambert so it's not shiny. So I'm going to choose another Lambert. I'll call this material Cage. And instead of just selecting a color, so if I just come here and I select a color, make it orange, and I apply it to that, and it's just a single solid color, kind of like what you're used to. But if I click on this node here, this little checkerboard thing after the color, I can create a node and actually connect it instead of just a solid color to a variety of things. And the one that I'm going to use is File, because I have a file, I have a JPEG. So I click on File. It takes me to where I can choose that file. Under image name, I can click on this browser, and I put it on the desktop. And I called it, well, it's right here, Nicolas Cage Face Off Crazy. And now that material should be placed onto the object. And like I said, until you get used to UV maps and things, it kind of, you don't really know how it's going to go on there. And we'll get into that in more detail later. But for now, I'm just going to use kind of the default way that it was placed onto it. And I can rotate it around a little bit so you can see that in there. Now, the reason why you can't see it on in your work area here is you have to press 6 to be able to go to your shaded display. And if you have any kind of image on a material, you won't see it over here in your perspective view until you press 6. But you will see it in your render view because it has to calculate that and render that. So now I have this amazing screensaver. I'm going to sell this to Windows, make a fortune. The last thing that I want to show today is that Arnold also comes with a kind of default sun and sky setup that you can use. It creates a sky dome, which is a giant sphere around your area that can light your scene. And it's a really good way to create kind of outdoor scenes where everything is pretty evenly lit by the sun. And so if I turn off, I'm going to go ahead and delete. I'll click on these lights and erase them. There's another light, and erase them, so I should go back to complete darkness. And now I'm going to come up here to Arnold Lights, and at the very bottom you'll see Physical Sky. And when I choose that, you'll see that your lighting has become set up. If I zoom way back here, you'll see that there's this sphere, that it's all inside a really big sphere. And my lighting is pretty standard, kind of just midday. You can even see the reflection of the sun in there. In the attributes, I have a bunch of settings that I can change for the sun. Like elevation, if I set it all the way, that's like at noon, just straight up and down light. I can set it down, and it's going to create a sunset situation. There's even kind of a sky setup for that. As I set the elevation down, the light becomes more pearly and orange because it's becoming sunset, and I can see that sun dropping below the horizon there, even in the reflection of the chrome and the gold. Azimuth is the direction that the sun is facing, so I can spin that and change the way that the sun is facing. Intensity is how bright the scene is. And so between the physical sky and the render view, you can very quickly kind of set up a scene that you can see that has really nice lighting and shadows. And then you can mess around with these settings to get it to be the way that you want it to. So maybe I want my shadows to be this way in this scene, like that. And then if you want when this is done rendering, you can see it's still trying to calculate that. You can set higher render settings here, where in this this little clapper with the gear next to it. If I click on that, those are my render settings, and I can change those. I don't really want to do this until I'm ready to like create the final image, but under Arnold Renderer I can turn all of these up, and that will increase the rendering time, but it'll get rid of all of that noise and just give me a higher quality render. But for now at least, that's going to work great for me. I can come up here to File, inside of my render view, and save the image, and it'll save it as a JPEG by default. So I can come here to Desktop and just say this is cage.jpg. And now if I open that up from my desktop, there's my image. So now it's a JPEG. I could put it up on Facebook, which of course I'm going to do. I can make it my desktop on my computer, which of course I'm going to do that too. And that's kind of an introduction to the Arnold Renderer.